Bubba Wallace is the most criticized and heavily watched NASCAR driver in the sport. From receiving constant hate from a large amount of fans, to becoming the biggest African American driver in the history of the sport, it's no surprise that he often takes center stage in the world of NASCAR compared to most other drivers when a controversy arises. However, what if I told you that Bubba Wallace was a misunderstood superstar, whose random incidents throughout his career painted a bad picture in the public eye, and hidden his impressive skills on track and unique personality compared to most? But when did the perception of Bubba change, and why is he so hated now? Well, to find that out, we have to go back to October 8th, 1993, when Darrell Wallace Jr. was born in Mobile, Alabama, where Darrell would spend his first few years of his life and eventually begin getting called Bubba by his sister, which ended up sticking as a name for him instead of a nickname. However, once he was a toddler, his family would move from their home in Alabama to Concord, North Carolina, which happens to be the home of the famed Charlotte Motor Speedway and right in the middle of where NASCAR is most popular, being located just 20 miles outside of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. So with that in mind, it's no shock that Bubba would soon develop an interest in racing, after him and his toddler would spend hours in their backyard, running go-karts and dirt bikes for fun, soon turning that into going to local races around the area to compete, where he fell in love with the sport. Yet racing in the South, which is a predominantly white area, as a young African American presented its issues every now and then. From being disqualified out of races for no reason, to being called racial slurs by fans, pit crew members, and even officials, while the tracks would often be littered with Confederate flags, it would take a strong mindset handed down to him by his parents to rise through it. With his mom Desiree Wallace saying encouraging things like, "You don't use violence," as well as, "You don't fight them when they say that to you. You get them back by winning. You earn their respect by winning." And lastly, never give the media anything negative to write about. He'd spend most of his teen years running in a multitude of cars and classes, trying to grind his way into NASCAR, including Bandoleros, Legend Cars, and Late Models, all of which assisted into him earning his big break of being selected into the 2010 NASCAR Drive for Diversity class, a project created by NASCAR back in the mid-2000s to provide training and opportunities for drivers and pit crew members from diverse backgrounds, with the goal of creating more of a chance to succeed in the sport, hoping to attract more female and minority fans, drivers, as well as employees. The program assisted Bubba with securing a ride for Rev Racing in the K&E Series, and he'd make his NASCAR sanctioned debut at Greenville Pickens Speedways for them in the series, which he'd immediately win, making him the youngest winner in series history at just 16 years old, showing he had the ability to compete against those with much more experience than him. Outside of this, he'd continue on with his season by winning once again at Lee USA Raceway, while finishing third in the standings, and even taking home Rookie of the Year honors at season's end, making him the first African American driver to win Rookie of the Year in a NASCAR sanctioned series across its 60-year history. His impressive talent soon assisted him in being signed to Joe Gibbs Racing as a development driver for the top Toyota team in NASCAR, creating a direct pipeline into the Cup Series for his future. For now though, Bubba Wallace was left to focus on returning back to the K&E Series for 2011, now under the Toyota banner, going out and winning 3 times, while finishing runner-up in the season standings, just 66 points behind the eventual champion Max Gresham. Yet following this, he'd make the biggest jump of his young racing career, as after moving over to Joe Gibbs Racing in the K&E Series, he'd also be promoted all the way up to just one step below Cup in the Nationwide Series, driving in the number 20 for Joe Gibbs Racing in a few select events. Bubba Wallace's NASCAR debut would end up coming at Iowa Speedway at 18 years old, starting a long journey of being the only African American driver in a white-dominated sport. He'd qualify 8th earlier that morning for his first of 4 races with one of the best teams in the garage, presenting him an excellent opportunity to show his talent amongst some of NASCAR's brightest prospects and future stars, which is exactly what he'd end up doing, spending most of the 250-lap race inside the top 10 and keeping up with his teammates of Brian Scott and Michael McDowell to eventually come home in 12th place with a clean race car. He'd return to the series a few months later for his next start in NASCAR, coming at the same track he had just made his debut at, and with the previous experience he had at the track, he'd qualify on the outside front row in 2nd place, immediately going on to establish himself once the green flag dropped.
Down the front straightaway, and this race is green.
Bubba continued to lead for the next 35 laps, until being passed by Austin Dillon while navigating his way through lap traffic, eventually carrying this speed throughout the entire night to bring him his first ever top 10 as 7th, and with another top 10 run at Richmond, as well as a pole at Dover in his final start of the year, he had done more than enough to show that he was worthy of a top tier NASCAR ride in one of the lower series, which is exactly what he'd end up getting. Bubba would move into a full-time seat, driving for Kyle Busch Motorsports in the Truck Series at just 19 years old, making him only the 4th African American driver in the history of NASCAR to race full-time in a national series. And with the team he was driving for, it was expected for him to be a winning threat every week he was on the track. Though his season would get off to a rocky start. First by being right-reared under caution at Rockingham during the 3rd race of the year, by a 4-time truck champion in Ron Hornaday for slightly dooring him for a position, and then once again crashing right when a caution came out, this time by his own doing, ending up hard into the Charlotte inside wall. After a lackluster summer, he'd soon pick it back up to finish the final 9 races out strong, collecting 3 top 5s in 5 races, compared to his 1 top 5 in his first 13, before the series returned to Martinsville, a track Bubba had ran very well at in his first career start at earlier in the year. Rolling off the grid in 3rd place, he wasted no time getting to the front of the field, passing Cup Series veteran Denny Hamlin on a lap 7 restart, then immediately going after and passing Johnny Sauter 3 laps later to take the lead. However, a long run soon followed, as so often happens at Martinsville, allowing one of the sport's best at the track in Denny Hamlin to run him back down and retake the lead for the next 60 laps. But the big moment of the race came when Hamlin was shuffled out of the line just past halfway in the event, soon getting involved in a wreck, which took out Bubba's biggest threat to win the race. He'd restart from the lead with 50 laps remaining, seeing the race feature multiple yellows to break up any long runs to the end, leading to a 6 to go restart to settle it all, where Bubba immediately jumped out to the lead and ran away with it, to become the first African American driver to win a NASCAR National Series race dating back to Wendell Scott on December 1st, 1963.
Down the backstretch, Darrell Wallace Jr. almost a backstretch lead over 2nd place Brendan Gaughan. Out of turn number 4, Darrell Wallace Jr. is going to get his first win in the Camping World Truck Series.
Also, if you enjoy the content I create, you should consider subscribing to never miss videos like this one. Anyways, back to the video. He'd conclude the season a few weeks later at Homestead, finishing 8th place in the standings, but not without controversy in the final 3 races, as during a practice session for the 2nd to last race of the year at Phoenix, he'd be absolutely cleaned out by the 38 of Chad Freewald, going up and showing his displeasure by punching him in his helmet, one of his first showings of high emotion in the sport. But could he carry this over into a better sophomore season? In his return to the 54 in the Truck Series, he'd once again start the season off on the wrong foot, collecting 2 DNFs in his first 6 races, yet he'd soon turn a corner, rallying to win 4 times throughout the final 16 races of the season at a multitude of tracks to show how versatile his talent truly was. First with an impressive win at the Flat Mile Gateway by leading over half the laps, and next by besting the sport's best at dirt in Kyle Larson at the lone dirt race on NASCAR's calendar in Eldora to win the 2nd ever event there, as well as again besting him at one of his most dominant tracks, this time in Homestead, a difficult track for any driver to win at. However, his biggest win would once again come at Martinsville, when while running a throwback car identical to Wendell Scott, Bubba Wallace would dominate the race and capture a win.
Short track sensation, 2nd year in a row, he's going to win it at Martinsville.
Another one, God dang, I love you guys. Woo! Yeah, baby!
After 5 wins in 2 years, as well as a 3rd place finish in the standings, it was time for Bubba to move up the ladder in development to the Xfinity Series. However, the harsh reality of sponsorship in the world of motorsports would soon strike him, leading him to ask to be released from his Joe Gibbs Racing development contract, the team that signed him and brought him up all the way through the ranks of NASCAR to pursue other teams, in hopes of finding a competitive Xfinity ride, eventually leading him to Roush Fenway Racing just before the 2015 season, signing a multi-year deal to drive the number 6 full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, gifting him a chance to compete on a team that had won 2 of the last 4 championships in that series. But what would he do with his new ride? Bubba spent the majority of the first 11 races running consistently while clicking off solid finishes, posting just one finish outside of the top 15, yet outside of a battle with his teammate at Dover, he wouldn't come close to competing for a win during the season, with his highlight being an impressive third place run at Chicago late in the year to help boost him up to 7th in the standings to wrap up an impressively consistent rookie season, leaving him in 2nd, just behind Daniel Suarez for Rookie of the Year honors. Now the only question was if he could improve on his stats in the next season and transform into a race-winning prospect. However, surprisingly, he and the entire team of Roush Fenway Racing, top to bottom, took a step back in performance, failing to win across the board as a group while Bubba floundered from it, earning 5 less top 10s and seeing his average finish spike up 4 positions up to 15.7. Putting him in a disappointing 11th place at the season's end in the standings, and it wouldn't get any better for him in the series for 2017. As after turning a corner and nearly matching his 2016 total in top 10s by race 11, while sitting 4th in the standings, well on his way to a playoff berth, the team would run out of sponsorship and funding to field a car, leaving the now 23-year-old without a ride midway through the season. Nevertheless though, things would all change for him in the wake of another driver's disaster.
Getting crowded up there in the front right now with the 42. Oh,
whoa,
trouble!
Big crash. Danica Patrick and Joey Logano and Eric Almirola.
Holy smoly. Oh, heavy damage there on Danica.
Those cars are killed.
Onto the gurney and then to the ambulance. And so all of our well wishes are with Eric Almirola, and once again we want to stress that he is awake and alert and communicating with the rescue personnel at the scene.
The crash sidelined Eric Almirola for the next 8 weeks, and after swapping between multiple sub-drivers, Richard Petty would soon select Bubba Wallace to drive the car in place of the injured Almirola for a few races, presenting him a chance to drive one of the most popular numbers in NASCAR history, with multiple ties to records, pop culture, and winning. His first race in the series would not be something to write home about though, as after qualifying an impressive 16th, he'd go on to suffer multiple self-inflicted speeding penalties throughout the race, sitting him as low as 37th in the running order at one point, but in spite of that he'd managed to rebound with a 26th place finish, 1 lap down. Each of Bubba's next 3 starts in the series saw him improve in finishing result compared to the last, finishing 19th in his next try at Michigan, followed by his first top 15 of 15th during his Cup Series Super Speedway debut at Daytona, and rounding out his tenure by just finishing outside of the top 10 at Kentucky with 11th. So with Eric Almirola leaving the team to join Stewart-Haas Racing at the end of the year, it was no surprise when it was announced on October 25th, 2017, that he had been signed to race full-time for Richard Petty Motorsports in the 43 for 2018, making him the first African-American driver to run full-time in the Cup Series since 1971. Bubba's first weekend as a full-time Cup driver would begin with the biggest race of his life, starting in his first ever Daytona 500, and it would go nearly perfect for him, finishing 3rd in his duel while navigating his way through the carnage in the later stages of the race to earn a runner-up finish, just barely beating Denny Hamlin by 2 1/1000ths of a second, leaving him as emotional as a driver could be.
I'm gonna talk like this. All right, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say walk through the final laps, but forget the final laps. Walk through just the emotion of this moment for you right now.
Oh, it's a sensitive subject, but I'm just so emotional over where my family has been the last 2 years that I don't talk about it, but it's just so hard. And so having them here to support me is...
However, after his impressive runner-up in the Daytona 500, he'd be shot right back down to earth for the remainder of his rookie season, seeing disappointing runs of 32nd, 28th, and 34th across his next 5 races, and it wouldn't get any better from there, as outside of an impressive run in his Bristol debut, where he'd drive up from the back of the field to lead multiple laps on pure speed, there wouldn't be anything to have hope from, going on to earn just 2 more top 10s, as well as 6 DNFs for the rest of the season. one of which being a horrific hit to the Turn 1 Pocono wall following his brakes going out late in the race. His rookie season left him battered, finishing 28th in the standings with an average finish of 24th, and unfortunately for him, he'd go on to see little to no improvement for 2019. Because outside of earning even more praise from the fan base for turning Kyle Busch at Watkins Glen, his sophomore season would be a disappointment, improving his average finish just barely to 23rd, while slicing his top 10 total down to just 1 in 36 races, putting him once again 28th in the final standings. The pandemic rocked the entire sports world, and NASCAR was no different, being forced to adapt by running virtual races on iRacing during a 2-month break, which saw Bubba lose a sponsor after rage parking his car mid-race.
He's still down there. Still there. Yep, he just came up and wrecked the hell out of you again on purpose.
Y'all have it going.
That's it. That's why I don't take this shit serious.
This would be the least of his challenges that he'd face going forward, yet he'd still have a day to remember on June 10, 2020. As NASCAR officially banned the Confederate flag from all their events and properties, coincidentally on the same day Bubba would run a Black Lives Matter paint scheme at Martinsville, rounding out the day in a solid 11th place. However, 11 days later at Talladega, his entire career would change.
This morning, NASCAR is trying to find out who carried out an abhorrent racist act. Officials found a noose in the garage of driver Bubba Wallace.
The FBI would later conclude in the following weeks that the noose had been in the garage since the previous fall, long before Bubba had been assigned that stall. However, the next day when he arrived at the grid for the next race, he wouldn't walk alone, as in a moment that transcended the sport, his fellow drivers and pit crews pushed his car down pit road as a sign of unity.
Led by reigning Cup Series champion Kyle Busch in green, and their crews, the entire garage area has rallied around Bubba Wallace and the number 43 today.
One moment would change the perception of Bubba in the eyes of millions, and in the days that followed, he'd be criticized by skeptics and racists, accused of staging the incident or seeking attention. Nevertheless, he kept racing and moving forward, pushing through by putting up his best ever Cup Series season, with 5 top 10s and a 22nd place points finish. But after 3 years in the series with no wins and just 3 top 5s, it seemed like time was running out for him to make a name for himself at the Cup level. Yet in spite of those stats, 50-time race winner Denny Hamlin and NBA legend Michael Jordan formed a team for the 2021 season called 2311 Racing, personally selecting Bubba Wallace to drive the 23 car for them, on a team that was closely aligned with the top echelon of Cup owners in Joe Gibbs, giving Bubba his first shot at competitive Cup equipment. But how would he handle the opportunity? The swap to Toyota would come with a disappointing debut season, failing to collect a single top 10 all the way until the 19th race in June at Pocono, while the remainder of the year wouldn't see him get any more consistent, finishing second at Daytona to put him 200 points out of making the playoffs. But a few weeks later on Monday, after a rain-delayed Talladega race, he changed the history of the sport. After taking the lead late in the race at Talladega Superspeedway, under the great threat of rain, history soon unfolded in a way that didn't need fireworks or perfect weather to feel monumental, as rain soon began to fall on the speedway after he took the lead, forcing NASCAR to call a caution while Bubba was out in front. And soon as the rain continued to fall, the race would be called official.
Patiently waiting, if you can, Bubba Wallace, when the caution came out, was in front of the field. The rain started then right away.
Bubba Wallace became the second African-American driver in NASCAR's top series to win a race, and the first to do it in nearly 6 decades, since Wendell Scott's historic but uncelebrated win in 1963, which was taken away due to NASCAR officials being concerned on how a white crowd would react. Although he'd finished all the way back in 21st at the end of the year in the standings, the win still made the season a success, and with the expansion of his team going to 2 cars, along with a new next-gen car evening the slate, 2022 seemed like a perfect year for him to break out and change his narrative. His year started off well, with another runner-up in the Daytona 500. However, inconsistencies all around as a race team led him to lag behind his teammate Kurt Busch for much of the season, until the driver of the 45 would unfortunately suffer a career-ending injury during a Pocono qualifying session. And to make matters worse for the team in general, during a push to make the playoffs, Bubba would lose a race at Michigan with the dominant car to Kevin Harvick, which would end up being the deciding factor on if he would qualify for the playoffs or not, as he wouldn't come close to a win for the rest of the regular season. Despite that, and a number change to assist with owner's points, Bubba kept pushing, and during the second race of the playoffs, he'd break through at Kansas to collect his first win at a non-super speedway, signifying to the entire NASCAR world that he was more than capable of competing in the Cup Series.
Bubba Wallace looking for his second career win in the Cup Series. His final time through 3 and 4. He's gonna do it. Bubba Wallace wins at Kansas.
Surround the Bubba Wallace.
But just as quick as Bubba climbed on top of the NASCAR world, he'd fall from it. As soon after in the coming race at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, he'd be walled while fighting with one of the sport's most popular drivers in Kyle Larson, immediately damaging his car. However, in response to this, he'd veer right and take out both of them at well over 170 miles per hour, taking round of 8 driver Christopher Bell with them. Bubba Wallace would be suspended from the following race at Homestead for this. Nevertheless, he'd quietly round out 2022, with improvements all across the board compared to the year prior, and come back the following year hoping to continue on this, which is exactly what he'd do, seeing him go out and put together a stellar regular season, albeit with 5 DNFs, including a race at COTA which saw him say something that you never see NASCAR drivers say after crashing out of an event.
2 weeks in a row making rookie mistakes, 6 years in the Cup, need to be replaced.
Thanks, Bubba.
His consistent regular season ended up sitting him directly on the cut line for the playoffs entering Daytona, searching for his first ever playoff berth, and after his main points threatened Ty Gibbs would be involved in the big one, while the race ended with no new winner, it meant Bubba Wallace had secured his first ever playoff berth. He'd quickly advanced into the round of 12 after Bristol as the last seed, yet was eliminated after the Roval following an overtime restart at Texas, which saw him fail to hold off William Byron for the win, being the deciding factor on if he would make it into the round of 8 or not. Later going on to end 2023 10th in the standings for his first top 10 points finish in his Cup career. Now with the expectation of him repeating this type of season going forward, he'd be tasked with repeating it in 2024. But in spite of the 2023 season being his first playoff berth, he failed to make them again, albeit with a better season than the one prior. Going out and posting 6 top 5s and 14 top 10s, yet missing the playoffs thanks to a slew of crashes, while also earning even more hatred from the fan base after a $50,000 fine at the conclusion of the Chicago street race for making contact with race winner Alex Bowman under the cooldown lap while trying to show his displeasure for a prior incident on the track. A similar incident to one a year earlier that once again featured Alex Bowman. Although he missed the playoffs, Bubba would wrap up the year 13th in the standings without them, or 18th in the normal standings, yet posted better stats all around the board compared to 2023. Which brings us to today in 2025, where Bubba Wallace is putting together the best season of his life as of now, consistently running in the top 5 at every type of track, while knocking on the door of his first win since 2022. He continues to grow and develop in his personal life, bringing his first child into the world in September of 2024, which has changed his outlook on life and him as a driver completely. Some NASCAR fans have created a false illusion amongst themselves that Bubba Wallace isn't a cup-worthy driver and is a bad person overall in general. However, it's hard to find a competitor out there who wants to win as bad as he does and someone who will account for his mistakes quite like him. The truth is, Bubba has defied all odds in NASCAR, rising through the ranks in an industry in a path that has rarely been walked as an African American, and doing it with incredible success along the way. Despite all this, he continues to get better year in and year out, and he will only continue to grow as a driver and as a human in the future.